Mr. President, I know that so many of my colleagues were all looking forward to wrapping up this year's business and hopefully getting home soon for the holidays. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about a couple of issues. One of them to give some remarks about my colleague, the senator from Louisiana, on her retirement, and to mention a few things that have been going on in small business and the Small Business Committee, which will be wrapping up business. And those two are kind of synonymous in my mind because my colleague, Senator Landrieu, has been, for the better part of the last couple of years, the chair of that committee and did some incredible work. And as legislation is moving through the final days here, we've been very successful at getting some important legislation passed for small business. One, the fact that we were able to be part of the Defense Authorization Bill, sole source contracting for women entrepreneurs so that they can more easily get contracting with the federal government. That's going to help us have their great products and services more easily contracted and get access to those contracts. There's also money for micro lending programs. My colleague from Michigan, Senator Levin, had pioneered an idea that was so important to women entrepreneurs, the fact that the kind of lending that they would like to see from the Small Business Administration was micro lending, and women want to get access to microloans, but they also want an intermediate loan level of $200,000 and less, and that helped them target some of the business interests they had, because we definitely need more women entrepreneurs in our country. And the third thing is the STEP program, which is a small business export assistance program that works with states. The federal government, the Small Business Administration, works with states to help them target businesses within their states that can use export assistance to become exporters. And this is such an important issue for our country because we, with a growing middle class around the globe, have great opportunity to sell new products and services around the globe. But many of our small businesses are challenged by the risk of making those kinds of attempts to sell in those markets. And so this export assistance program, which had been a pilot, is now going to be a funded permanent program. And so we're very excited about that and excited that it's moving through. But I also didn't get a chance last week to speak about my colleague, Senator Landrieu, on the floor, and I wanted to just take a few minutes to remind my colleagues, as somebody who has served with her on the Energy Committee and served with her in small business, I've been so impressed with the accomplishments that she's achieved in her career here in the United States Senate. But so much of the time that she was talking the other day, rightfully so, shared a lot of moments of her career and a lot of personal moments. But I just wanted to remind my colleagues of some of the very big challenges that she faced as a senator and how impressed I am with what she was able to actually overcome. Many people know that obviously being hit by Katrina was one of the biggest economic challenges, not just to Louisiana, but to our country. And her impassioned leadership and calls to hasten the efforts to make sure that we were doing everything we can for those individuals to receive medical aid and shelter and help find loved ones was nonstop for many days. And she successfully, as she mentioned on the floor, urged OMB to fully fund the repairs of the levee system in southeast Louisiana, and it continues that work, and it succeeded in passing legislation that directed the Army Corps of Engineers to analyze and design and strengthen the storm mitigation systems against Category 5 hurricanes. Now, if any of my colleagues here in the United States Senate have ever worked with the Army Corps of Engineers, say no more. You know how challenging it is. We don't control them. They base all their work on science. They have a budget. It's never enough money. And it can seem like you're fighting them forever and ever to get something you think is as essential as protecting the people in your state to move forward. So she did all of that in moving the focus to making sure that Category 5 hurricanes, that we were establishing a defense against that. I also want you to know that if you ever had a flood or a storm in your state post-Katrina, the first person you were going to hear from was Mary Landrieu. she didn't stop her efforts at Louisiana. She wanted to take everything that she learned from that emergency and call you up and tell you, these are the things you need to do immediately, this is how you should get prepared. And I know that she did that for many of my colleagues, and we so appreciated it. Another catastrophe happened, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and as a member of the Commerce Committee, I can tell you I talked to her many times about these issues as it related to the Clean Water Act and what was eventually passed, the Restore Act, which was a bipartisan effort. But basically, it made sure that 80% of the Clean Water Act fines from BPA went directly into the Gulf states, making this the biggest individual investment in environmental conservation and restoration in our country's history. And so that was no easy task, and there were a lot of people at the time who wanted to focus on many different aspects of that disaster, and so many things have happened since then, but I can remember clearly the catastrophe and what it meant for the fishing community, the individuals, those states' economies, all of the questions, and a lot of people looking backwards about what happened, but the senator from Louisiana was looking forward to make sure that those funds were invested right there in the Gulf, and that was a big challenge that she was successful in meeting. And obviously, she used her voice for many things related to Louisiana, but I want to emphasize to my colleagues how much she also used her voice for many other people who didn't seem to be here in the halls of Washington, and made sure that those issues were top of the agenda. We had the 2009 economic crisis in our country, and many people remember because it had such a huge economic impact to individual families. Well, the senator from Louisiana made sure that she was standing up for small businesses during that time period, because the small businesses, basically, there were millions of Americans who lost their job during that time period. And as everybody was here talking about what to do to help these big banks, and we all know that they got a bailout, many small businesses across the country actually had performing lines of credit cut out right from under them. And so they didn't have anybody knocking on the door to make sure that, that things helped them. But the senator from Louisiana got very vocal here about the prioritization of making sure that we did something about conventional lending and tried to tackle this issue. From 2007 to 2009, the number of SBA borrowers dropped by more than half, and the amount of loans dropped by more than 1/3, and many of these small businesses were paying the price. So Senator Landrieu got busy fighting for what was the Small Business Jobs Act. And if you remember that debate, there were many times that some people on the other side of the aisle didn't want to support that legislation, or even moments when Treasury didn't know that they wanted to support that legislation. And she was successful in the end of getting that legislation passed 61-38. And the Small Business Job Act leveraged more than $42 billion in loans to more than 90,000 businesses throughout the SBA, and provided, along with other measures, the Small Business Job Act helped target about $12 billion in tax cuts for small business. So while the big banks had an immediate relief, they had someone down in DC here fighting for small businesses, and that was Senator Landrieu. And that legislation, we also saw a small business lending fund increase so that there was more capital on Main Street for small business. As a result of the Job Act, 2011 and 2012 were the two biggest years on record for the 7A and the 504 program, which are kind of the premier programs for the Small Business Administration. And that went a long way to helping small businesses try to recover. And also the Small Business Credit Initiative helped small businesses get access to capital. So all of these things were what my colleague from Louisiana fought for to help small businesses. And I think it's a perfect example, along with those other things, about how she used her voice to try to bring clarity to the challenges we were facing and stand up for those who weren't being heard. She also, though, lent her voice to another group that is often, we don't necessarily understand all the issues. I kind of think that she took over for Senator Byrd, who was a great advocate on behalf of animals and talked a lot about his dog and many of the stories that he shared, warmed everybody's heart. Well, Senator Landrieu last year was the Humane Society's Legislator of the Year for her consistent work to prevent the cruel practices of horse slaughter, to protect wild animals, and strengthen provisions against animal fighting. So she clearly deserved that title, and we certainly appreciate her efforts there. And she was also a voice for the District of Columbia. Now you have to ask yourself, people get committee assignments, and yes, she had that committee assignment, but the thing about Senator Landrieu is once she took an assignment, she was tough on making sure that those issues were addressed, and she did that for the District of Columbia. So I just want to add my sincere thanks to the senator from Louisiana for all of her work in public service here in the United States Senate. She's going to be missed. I know that she and I share a passion of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, an issue that is near and dear to my heart and something that she has tried in her time here in the United States Senate to get fully funded, and we're going to continue that work on her behalf in the Energy Committee. So again, I thank my colleague and a dear friend for just an incredible passion in fighting for those whose voices weren't always heard. There's no mistake, her voice was heard here in the United States Senate. I thank the President. I yield the floor.